Hi guys! Tonight, we're going back in time to explore one of humanity's most fundamental challenges, the quest for clean, accessible water during the Middle Ages. For nearly 1,000 years, from roughly 500 to 1500 CE, ordinary people across Europe, Asia, and beyond faced daily struggles that we can barely imagine today. Picture turning on your faucet and nothing comes out. Imagine walking miles just to fill a single bucket. Think about drinking from sources that might make you seriously ill because you had no other choice. This is the story of how our ancestors survived, thrived, and innovated in ways that would eventually lead to the water systems we take for granted today. We'll journey through medieval villages and bustling cities, explore the ingenious solutions people developed, and discover how the simple act of getting water shaped entire civilizations. From Roman aqueducts that still echoed through medieval times, to the humble village well that served as a community lifeline. From elaborate castle cisterns to the dangerous rivers that both nourished and threatened medieval life. This is a tale of human ingenuity, community cooperation, and the endless pursuit of one of life's most basic necessities. Okay, friends, before you settle in, if you enjoy this kind of deep dive content, then click the like button and don't forget to subscribe. And yes, leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I really enjoy seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights and turn on the fan, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. The morning mist clung to the cobblestone streets of a typical English village in the year 1347. Margaret, a young woman of 22, stirred from her straw mattress as the first light of dawn crept through the gaps in her thatched roof. Like millions of people across medieval Europe, her day would begin not with the simple turn of a handle, but with a journey that would take her nearly an hour before she could quench her family's thirst or prepare their morning meal. The wooden bucket beside her bed, crafted by the village cooper from oak staves bound with iron hoops, represented both her burden and her lifeline. This bucket, along with a smaller clay pitcher for drinking water, constituted her family's entire water collection system. Margaret's cottage sat on the outskirts of the village, a positioning that reflected her family's modest social status, but also meant a longer walk to the community well. As she stepped outside, the familiar sounds of medieval morning life surrounded her. Roosters crowing, pigs snorting in their pens, and the distant sound of the village bell calling people to morning prayers. The path to the well had been worn smooth by countless feet over generations, creating a shallow groove in the earth that helped guide villagers even in the darkest nights. Along this path, she would encounter her neighbors, all carrying their own vessels and beginning their own daily water ritual. The village well stood at the heart of the community, both literally and figuratively. Constructed of carefully fitted stones that had been quarried from a hillside several miles away, the well descended nearly 40 feet into the earth before reaching the groundwater that sustained the entire village. The well's opening was surrounded by a circular stone wall about 3 feet high, worn smooth by thousands of hands that had gripped it while drawing water. A wooden windlass, essentially a horizontal wooden cylinder mounted on a frame, allowed people to lower and raise buckets using a rope that had been woven from hemp grown in the village's own fields. The stonework of the well represented months of skilled labor by master masons who had learned their craft through years of apprenticeship and practical experience. Each stone had been carefully selected not only for its size and shape, but also for its resistance to water damage and its ability to fit perfectly with its neighbors to create a seamless, watertight barrier. The masons had used traditional techniques passed down through generations, including the use of lime mortar mixed with local sand and small stones to create joints that would remain strong and waterproof for decades. The quarrying of these stones had been a major community undertaking that required coordination between the village and the hillside quarry owners, involving negotiations about payment, transportation, and timing that reflected the complex economic relationships that supported medieval construction projects. Teams of oxen had been required to transport the heavy stones from the quarry to the village, a process that took several weeks and required careful planning to avoid conflicts with agricultural activities and seasonal weather patterns. The hemp rope used with the windlass represented another example of local resource utilization and community craftsmanship. Hemp plants were grown in designated fields that were carefully managed to produce fibers of the right length and strength for rope making. The process of converting hemp plants into usable rope involved multiple steps, including retting, breaking, scutching, and heckling that required specialized knowledge and equipment. The village rope maker, often a part-time specialist who also engaged in farming, possessed skills that were essential for maintaining not only the well's operation, but also many other aspects of medieval life that depended on strong, reliable cordage. The windlass mechanism itself demonstrated sophisticated understanding of mechanical principles that allowed human muscle power to lift heavy loads with maximum efficiency. The wooden cylinder was crafted from seasoned hardwood that had been carefully selected for its strength and resistance to weathering. The frame that supported the cylinder was constructed using traditional joinery techniques that created strong, durable connections without relying on metal fasteners that were expensive and sometimes difficult to obtain. The entire mechanism was designed to be operated by a single person, while also being robust enough to handle the stresses of daily use and occasional emergency situations when multiple people might need to work together to address urgent water needs. The construction of this well represented a massive community effort that had taken place decades before Margaret's birth. Village men had spent months digging through layers of soil, clay, and rock, using nothing but iron-tipped wooden tools and their own muscle power. As they dug deeper, the walls had been carefully lined with stones to prevent collapse, each stone selected and placed with the precision of a master craftsman. The community had pooled resources to hire a professional well digger, a specialized tradesman whose knowledge of underground water sources was considered almost magical by ordinary villagers. This expert had used techniques passed down through generations, reading the landscape for signs of underground streams and knowing exactly how to locate the most reliable water sources. Margaret lowered her bucket into the well's depths, listening for the satisfying splash that indicated she had reached water. The rope, rough against her palms despite years of use, required careful handling to avoid the splinters that could make water collection a painful experience. Drawing the bucket back up was the most physically demanding part of the process, especially when the groundwater level dropped during dry summers. The water that emerged was cool and generally clear, though Margaret knew better than to assume it was completely safe. Medieval people understood, through bitter experience if not through scientific knowledge, that water sources could become contaminated and cause serious illness. The well water itself came from underground sources that medieval people couldn't fully understand but had learned to locate through practical experience. Groundwater moved through layers of soil and rock, naturally filtering out some impurities, but potentially picking up others along the way. Village wells typically drew from relatively shallow aquifers, water sources that were recharged by rainfall and seasonal flooding. During wet years, the water table would rise, making well water more abundant and easier to draw. During droughts, water levels would drop dramatically, sometimes forcing entire communities to abandon wells that had served them for generations. Quality control for well water was a constant community concern that required vigilance from every user. Village elders appointed well keepers, respected community members, whose job was to monitor the water source and report any changes in taste, smell, or appearance. These well keepers understood that certain seasonal changes were normal. Water might taste slightly different after heavy rains or appear cloudier during spring melts. However, they also knew the warning signs of serious contamination: unusual colors, strong odors, or the presence of dead animals or waste materials near the well opening. Margaret filled her bucket and began the return journey to her cottage, but her water collection duties were far from complete. The single bucket of well water would serve her family's drinking needs for perhaps half a day, meaning she would need to make this trip at least twice daily, and more often during summer months when increased physical activity and higher temperatures demanded greater water consumption. Additionally, her family's daily activities required water for cooking, cleaning, and basic sanitation, needs that the single village well couldn't adequately meet for every household. For these additional water needs, Margaret would need to visit the village stream, a smaller waterway that flowed year-round except during the most severe droughts. This stream originated in hills several miles away and meandered through the village before joining a larger river downstream. Unlike well water, which was generally considered suitable for drinking, stream water was viewed with more caution by medieval people who had learned through experience that flowing water sources could carry diseases and contaminants from upstream communities. The stream served multiple purposes that sometimes conflicted with water quality. Village women used its banks for washing clothes, a process that involved beating garments against rocks and using harsh soaps made from animal fats and wood ash. These soaps, while effective for cleaning, could leave residues in the water that made it less suitable for drinking. Additionally, the stream powered the village mill, where grain was ground into flour through the action of a large water wheel. The miller, one of the village's most important craftsmen, controlled water flow through a series of wooden channels and dams that could affect water availability for other users downstream. Animal husbandry also complicated stream water quality in ways that medieval people understood but couldn't always prevent. Livestock needed water for drinking and cooling, especially during summer months, and farmers often led their animals directly to stream banks for this purpose. Cattle, sheep, and pigs would wade into the water,
disturbing sediments, and leaving waste materials that could affect water quality for human users downstream. Village regulations typically address these concerns by designating specific areas and times for animal watering, but enforcement was often inconsistent, especially during busy agricultural seasons. Margaret's family, like most medieval households, developed strategies for managing these competing demands on their local water sources. They learned to collect drinking water from upstream locations early in the morning, before livestock watering and laundry activities could affect water quality. They also understood seasonal patterns. Spring snowmelt might make water cloudier, but also increased flow rates that helped flush away contaminants, while late summer low water levels concentrated both natural minerals and human-introduced pollutants. The village had established informal but effective systems for coordinating these various uses of their shared water resources. Elder women in the community, respected for their experience and practical knowledge, often served as informal coordinators who helped resolve conflicts and ensure that everyone's essential needs were met. These women understood the delicate balance required to maintain community harmony while also protecting the water sources that everyone depended upon for survival. Morning water collection typically began before sunrise, when the air was cool and the water was at its cleanest. This early timing served multiple practical purposes beyond water quality. It allowed people to complete their water collection before the heat of the day made physical labor more difficult, and it ensured that livestock and other activities hadn't yet disturbed the water sources. The pre-dawn darkness required people to navigate familiar paths by memory and touch, skills that were developed through years of practice and that created a sense of intimate connection with the local landscape. The social protocols that governed these early morning water collection activities reflected both practical necessities and community values about cooperation and mutual respect. People learned to move quietly to avoid disturbing sleeping neighbors, to share space at water sources without crowding or rushing others, and to offer assistance to those who might be struggling with heavy loads or difficult conditions. These informal social rules helped maintain community harmony, while also ensuring that essential water collection activities could proceed efficiently and safely. Different seasons required different approaches to managing the various demands on village water sources. Spring flooding could make streams dangerous and muddy, while simultaneously providing opportunities to collect large quantities of rainwater for storage. Summer droughts required careful conservation and sometimes difficult negotiations about priorities when water supplies became limited. Autumn provided opportunities for major cleaning and maintenance projects that would prepare water systems for winter challenges. Winter brought its own complications, as freezing temperatures could make water collection dangerous, while also affecting the availability and quality of different water sources. The knowledge required to navigate these seasonal challenges was accumulated over generations of practical experience and transmitted through informal educational systems that combined direct instruction with hands-on participation in community water management activities. Children learned not only the physical skills needed for water collection, but also the social protocols, quality assessment techniques, and emergency procedures that were essential for community survival during water-related crises. Village animals played complex roles in these water management systems, serving as both essential resources and potential sources of contamination that required careful management and community coordination. Cattle, sheep, pigs, and chickens all required water for drinking and cooling, but their presence near water sources could also introduce waste materials and disease organisms that threatened human health.
The challenge was to provide adequate water access for essential livestock, while also protecting human water supplies from contamination.
Different animals had different water requirements and behaviors that influenced how they could be integrated into community water management systems. Cattle required large quantities of water and preferred to wade into streams or ponds where they could drink deeply and cool themselves during hot weather. Sheep were more adaptable and could use smaller water sources, but they often traveled in flocks that could quickly overwhelm local water supplies. Pigs were notorious for creating muddy, contaminated conditions around water sources, but they were also valuable for food production and waste management. The scheduling and location of animal watering activities required careful coordination to balance animal welfare needs with human water quality requirements. Many villages designated specific times and places for animal watering that minimized conflicts with human water collection, while also ensuring that livestock received adequate water for health and productivity. These arrangements often required complex negotiations between different households and land users who had varying numbers and types of animals with different water requirements. Community enforcement of these animal watering protocols required both formal regulations and informal social pressure to ensure compliance with agreements that protected shared water resources. Village councils or other governing bodies typically established basic rules about animal access to water sources, while day-to-day enforcement relied on community members who understood the importance of maintaining water quality for everyone's survival. The seasonal migration patterns of some livestock also affected village water management in ways that required advanced planning and flexible responses to changing animal populations. During summer months, cattle might be moved to higher pastures where different water sources were available, reducing pressure on village wells and streams, while requiring herders to develop alternative water management strategies for their animals. These seasonal movements were often coordinated between multiple communities to ensure that adequate water supplies were available for both animals and the people who cared for them. Medieval households lacked the materials and techniques necessary to create perfectly sealed containers, meaning that stored water was vulnerable to contamination from insects, dust, and other environmental factors. Clay vessels, the most common storage containers, were porous enough to allow some evaporation, which helped keep water cool, but also meant that storage capacity decreased over time. Wooden barrels, when available, provided better sealing, but required regular maintenance to prevent leaks and the growth of harmful organisms in the moist wood. The production of these storage containers represented significant investments in specialized craftsmanship and local materials that reflected both practical needs and economic constraints. Village potters needed access to suitable clay deposits, fuel for firing kilns, and the technical knowledge required to create vessels that balanced durability with functionality. The clay itself needed to be properly prepared through processes of weathering, kneading, and mixing that could take weeks or months to complete properly. Different types of clay had different properties that affected the final vessel's porosity, strength, and resistance to cracking, requiring potters to understand local geological conditions and adapt their techniques accordingly.
The firing process for ceramic water storage vessels required careful temperature control and timing that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of material science and thermal dynamics. Kilns needed to reach specific temperatures that were hot enough to properly harden the clay, but not so hot as to cause warping or cracking. The fuel for these kilns, typically wood from local forests, needed to be carefully selected and seasoned to burn at consistent temperatures for extended periods. The entire firing process could take several days and required constant attention to maintain proper conditions and prevent costly failures. Different shapes and sizes of water storage vessels served specific purposes that reflected both practical considerations and cultural preferences developed through generations of use. Large storage jars were designed to hold maximum quantities of water while occupying minimum floor space in crowded medieval households. Wide-mouth vessels made filling and cleaning easier, but also increased the risk of contamination from airborne particles. Narrow neck designs reduced contamination risks, but made cleaning more difficult and required careful pouring techniques to avoid spills. The decoration and finishing of water storage vessels often combined aesthetic considerations with functional improvements that enhanced their practical utility. Glazing, when available, provided smoother surfaces that were easier to clean and less prone to harboring harmful organisms. Surface textures could improve grip for safer handling, while also providing opportunities for artistic expression that reflected local cultural traditions and individual craftsman preferences. Some vessels included spouts, handles, or other features that made them more convenient to use, but also added complexity and potential failure points to their construction. Wooden coopering for water storage containers required different techniques and materials than those used for other purposes like grain storage or wine fermentation. Water containers needed to be watertight while also being resistant to the swelling and shrinking that could occur with changing moisture levels. The wood itself needed to be selected from species that wouldn't impart unpleasant tastes or odors to stored water while also being readily available in local forests. Oak was often preferred for its durability and relatively neutral flavor, but other woods might be used depending on local availability and economic considerations. The hooping of wooden water containers used iron bands that needed to be carefully sized and positioned to provide adequate compression without being so tight as to crack the wooden staves. The blacksmith's role in creating these metal components required understanding of both metallurgy and the mechanical properties of wood to produce hoops that would maintain proper pressure across varying temperature and humidity conditions. The assembly process required cooperation between cooper and blacksmith to ensure proper fit and long-term reliability. Maintenance of wooden water containers was an ongoing responsibility that required regular inspection and periodic repair or replacement of worn components. The wood needed to be kept properly moistened to maintain watertight seals, but not so wet as to encourage the growth of harmful organisms or the development of unpleasant odors. Metal hoops needed to be checked for rust or loosening and adjusted or replaced as necessary. These maintenance activities required both technical knowledge and access to materials and tools that might not always be readily available in rural communities.
Leather water containers, while less common for household storage, were important for travelers and specialized uses that required portable water storage solutions. The tanning process that converted animal hides into suitable leather required specialized knowledge and materials that were often available only in larger communities or through specialized tradespeople. Different tanning methods produced leather with different properties in terms of flexibility, water resistance, and durability, requiring tanners to match their techniques to the intended uses of the finished products. The construction of leather water containers required specialized stitching techniques and waterproofing treatments that would maintain their integrity under the stresses of repeated filling, carrying, and emptying. The leather needed to be thick enough to resist punctures and tears, but flexible enough to allow for the changes in shape that occurred as containers were filled and emptied. Seams needed to be positioned and reinforced to minimize stress concentrations while also maintaining watertight integrity under various load conditions. Waterproofing treatments for leather containers often involved the application of waxes, oils, or other substances that could improve water resistance while also helping to preserve the leather itself. These treatments needed to be renewed periodically as they wore off or became less effective over time. The materials used for these treatments needed to be compatible with water storage to avoid introducing unpleasant tastes or potentially harmful substances into the stored water. Metal water containers, while expensive and relatively uncommon in rural villages, represented the highest quality storage solutions available to medieval people with sufficient resources to obtain them. Copper vessels were particularly prized for their durability and resistance to contamination, while also being easier to clean and maintain than organic materials. The metalworking skills required to create these containers demanded specialized training and access to raw materials that were often imported from distant sources. The forming techniques used to create metal water containers required sophisticated understanding of metallurgy and metalworking processes that were typically concentrated in urban centers, where specialized craftspeople could access the materials, tools, and markets necessary to support their trades. Hammering techniques used to shape metal vessels required years of training to master, while also demanding physical strength and endurance that limited the number of people who could successfully pursue these occupations. Soldering and joining techniques for metal water containers required knowledge of alloys and flux materials that would create strong, watertight seams without introducing harmful substances into stored water. Different metals required different joining approaches, and the availability of necessary materials like tin for soldering often determined which techniques could be practically employed in different locations and economic circumstances. Margaret kept her family's drinking water in a large ceramic jar that had been crafted by the village potter using local clay and fired in a kiln heated by wood from the surrounding forest. This vessel, nearly 2 feet tall and designed with a narrow neck to minimize contamination, could hold approximately 3 gallons of water, enough for her family's drinking needs for about 2 days under normal circumstances. The jar's narrow opening was covered with a wooden lid that had been carefully shaped to fit tightly, and Margaret had learned to place a clean cloth over the opening before replacing the lid to provide an additional barrier against insects and debris. Seasonal variations in water availability created predictable but challenging cycles that shaped medieval life in fundamental ways. Spring brought snowmelt and increased rainfall, usually ensuring abundant water supplies, but also creating flooding conditions that could contaminate wells and make stream water muddy and unsafe.
Medieval people learned to prepare for these seasonal changes by cleaning and repairing their water collection systems during winter months, when water demand was lower and outdoor work was less demanding. Summer presented different challenges, as increased temperatures raised both water consumption and evaporation rates, while potentially decreasing available supplies.
Wells that flowed freely in spring might require deeper digging or more strenuous drawing efforts as water tables dropped.
Streams could slow to a trickle or even dry up completely during severe droughts, forcing communities to seek alternative sources or implement strict water rationing measures. Medieval people developed various strategies for summer water conservation, including the construction of cisterns and holding ponds that could capture and store spring runoff for use during drier months. Autumn brought its own water-related activities as communities prepared for winter months when outdoor water collection would become more difficult and dangerous.
This was the season for major maintenance projects, cleaning wells, repairing water collection equipment, and stockpiling materials needed for winter water access. Medieval people also used autumn months to process and preserve foods that would sustain them through winter, activities that required substantial amounts of water and careful planning to ensure adequate supplies remained available for daily needs. Winter water collection required different strategies and equipment to deal with freezing temperatures and dangerous conditions. Water sources that flowed freely during warmer months might freeze partially or completely, requiring medieval people to break through ice or find alternative sources. The physical act of water collection became more dangerous as icy paths increased the risk of falls and injuries, while shorter daylight hours meant that water collection trips needed to be carefully timed to avoid being caught outside after dark. Margaret's village had developed several techniques for winter water access that had been refined through generations of trial and error. The community well was partially sheltered by a wooden structure that helped protect the windlass mechanism from ice formation while providing some shelter for people drawing water during storms. Village men took turns breaking ice formations that could prevent proper operation of the well equipment, using iron-tipped tools to chip away ice without damaging the carefully constructed wooden mechanisms. For additional winter water needs, villagers learned to collect and store snow and ice in insulated spaces where it could be melted as needed. This technique required advanced planning to identify suitable storage locations and to stockpile the fuel needed for melting frozen water. Medieval people discovered that fresh snow generally provided cleaner water than older snow that had been exposed to wind-blown dirt and debris. But they also learned to avoid snow that had been discolored by smoke from cooking fires or other sources of contamination. The social aspects of water collection created complex community dynamics that went far beyond the simple mechanical process of drawing water from wells or streams. Water sources served as gathering places where villagers exchanged news, discussed community issues, and maintained the social connections that held medieval communities together. The morning and evening water collection times became informal but important social institutions where information flowed as freely as the water itself. Women,
who performed most household water collection duties, developed informal networks around shared water sources that provided mutual support and community problem-solving resources. These networks helped coordinate childcare responsibilities, share information about water quality issues, and organize community responses to water-related emergencies. When well water became contaminated or a stream dried up, it was often these informal women's networks that first identified problems and mobilized community resources to address them. The village well also served as a place where social hierarchies were both reinforced and sometimes challenged. Wealthier villagers might send servants to collect water, allowing them to avoid the physical labor while still benefiting from the social information exchange that occurred around water sources. However, water emergencies could break down these social distinctions, as even the most privileged community members found themselves participating directly in water collection and conservation efforts. Children played important roles in medieval water collection systems, often serving as water carriers for their families while learning the skills and knowledge they would need as adults. Young children might accompany their mothers on water collection trips, gradually taking on greater responsibilities as they demonstrated their ability to handle the physical demands and navigate the social expectations of community water use. Older children often performed independent water collection duties, freeing adults for other essential tasks, while providing children with opportunities to develop strength, responsibility, and community connections. The tools and equipment used for medieval water collection represented generations of practical innovation and adaptation to local conditions. Beyond the basic buckets and ropes used at community wells, medieval people developed a variety of specialized equipment designed to make water collection more efficient and reliable. Yokes, wooden frames that distributed the weight of water containers across a person's shoulders, allowed individuals to carry larger quantities of water with less physical strain and greater stability while walking on uneven paths. Water containers themselves reflected both local materials and specialized craftsmanship that balanced durability, capacity, and weight considerations. Clay vessels, while heavy and fragile, provided excellent water storage because their porous walls allowed for natural cooling through evaporation, and they could be crafted in large sizes using locally available materials. Wooden containers, often made by coopers using techniques similar to barrel making, offered greater durability and lighter weight, but required more specialized skills and materials to construct properly. Leather containers, crafted from treated animal hides, provided flexibility and durability that made them especially useful for travelers and traders who needed portable water storage solutions. These containers could be folded when empty, making them space efficient, and their flexibility allowed them to conform to irregular spaces during transport. However, leather containers required regular maintenance and treatment to prevent water leakage and the development of unpleasant tastes or odors. Metal containers, typically made from iron or copper when available, offered excellent durability and could be shaped into efficient designs, but they were expensive and often beyond the means of ordinary villagers. Wealthy households and institutions like monasteries might invest in metal water containers as long-term solutions that justified their higher initial cost through years of reliable service. Margaret's family owned several different types of containers that they used for different water-related purposes, each selected and maintained according to its intended use.
Her large ceramic storage jar remained in the cottage, too heavy and valuable to risk carrying on daily water collection trips. For well visits, she used a medium-sized wooden bucket that balanced capacity with portability, while keeping a smaller clay pitcher for carrying drinking water when visiting neighbors or working in distant fields. The village itself had been strategically located with water access as a primary consideration, a decision made by the community's founders decades earlier based on their understanding of local water sources and seasonal patterns. The site offered access to both groundwater through wells and surface water through the stream, providing backup options that could sustain the community even if one source became unavailable. Additionally, the village's position on slightly elevated ground protected it from flooding, while still maintaining reasonable access to water sources in the lower-lying areas. Medieval urban areas faced water challenges that were both similar to and different from those experienced in rural villages like Margaret's. Cities and large towns required much larger quantities of water to support their concentrated populations, but they also had more resources available for developing sophisticated water supply systems. Many medieval cities inherited Roman infrastructure, including aqueducts and public fountains that provided starting points for more elaborate water distribution networks. London, for example, had developed a complex system of conduits and public fountains that brought fresh water from springs outside the city into various neighborhoods where residents could collect it for household use. These systems required constant maintenance and periodic expansion as the city's population grew, but they provided much more convenient access to clean water than would have been possible through individual wells or trips to distant streams. Paris had developed different solutions based on its location along the Seine River and the availability of numerous springs in the surrounding hills. The city's water system included both public fountains fed by spring water and regulated access to the river through designated collection points. Municipal authorities appointed water carriers who could transport water to households for a fee, creating one of the earliest examples of commercialized water delivery services. Medieval monasteries represented some of the most sophisticated water management systems of their time, combining practical necessity with engineering innovation in ways that often exceeded the capabilities of secular communities. Monasteries required large amounts of clean water for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and various religious rituals, but they also had the organizational resources and technical knowledge needed to develop elaborate water supply systems. The Monastery of Canterbury in England developed an intricate system of pipes, channels, and settling tanks that provided running water to different parts of the monastery complex, while also supporting fish ponds, gardens, and sanitation facilities. This system drew water from multiple sources, treated it through a series of filtering and settling processes, and distributed it through a network that anticipated different quality requirements for different uses. Continental monasteries often developed similar but locally adapted systems that reflected both their specific needs and the geographic conditions of their locations. Alpine monasteries might develop systems for capturing and storing snowmelt, while Mediterranean monasteries focused on techniques for conserving water during long, dry seasons. These monastic water systems often served as models for secular communities, demonstrating techniques and technologies that could be adapted for broader use. Castle water systems presented unique challenges that combined the practical needs of large populations with defensive considerations that limited access to external water sources. Castle wells needed to be located within defensive walls while still reaching reliable groundwater sources, often requiring much deeper excavation than typical village wells. Additionally, castle wells needed to be protected against enemy attempts to poison or contaminate the water supply during periods of conflict. Many castles developed multiple water systems to ensure redundancy and security during long periods when external water sources might be cut off by attacking forces. These systems might include deep wells, cisterns for collecting and storing rainwater, and sometimes even underground channels that connected to springs or streams outside the castle walls. The engineering required for these systems often represented some of the most sophisticated hydraulic work of the medieval period. Rainwater collection represented another important water source that medieval people used to supplement wells and streams, especially in areas where groundwater was scarce or unreliable. Simple rainwater collection involved placing containers outside during rainstorms, but more sophisticated systems included gutters and downspouts that could channel water from rooftops into storage containers or cisterns. Medieval people learned to discriminate between different types of rainwater based on when and how it was collected. The first rain after a long dry period might wash accumulated dirt and debris from collection surfaces, making it less suitable for drinking, but perfectly adequate for washing or other household uses. Rain collected from clean roof surfaces was generally preferred over rain collected from ground level, where it might pick up soil and animal waste. The storage of collected rainwater required techniques for preventing contamination and maintaining water quality over extended periods. Medieval people discovered that rainwater stored in covered containers remained fresher longer than water exposed to air and sunlight, leading to the development of specialized cisterns and storage systems designed specifically for rainwater collection and preservation. Trade and travel created additional demands for portable water storage and transportation that led to innovations in container design and water preservation techniques. Merchants traveling long distances needed reliable methods for carrying adequate water supplies while minimizing weight and space requirements. This led to the development of lightweight, collapsible containers and techniques for purifying questionable water sources encountered during travel. Medieval people developed several methods for improving the safety and palatability of questionable water sources, techniques that reflected practical experience rather than scientific understanding of waterborne diseases. Boiling water was understood to make it safer for drinking, though medieval people attributed this effect to the removal of bad air rather than to the destruction of harmful microorganisms. Nevertheless, the practical result was the same. Boiled water was indeed safer for human consumption. The process of boiling water for safety purposes required significant investments of fuel and time that made it impractical for all water consumption, but useful for situations where water quality was particularly questionable or when someone was already ill and needed the safest possible drinking water. Medieval people learned to distinguish between situations where boiling was necessary and those where untreated water from reliable sources was acceptable, balancing safety concerns with practical resource limitations.
Different fuel sources for boiling water had various advantages and disadvantages that influenced when and how this purification technique was employed.
Wood, the most common fuel, provided reliable heat, but also required significant labor for collection and preparation. Dried animal dung, commonly used in areas where wood was scarce, burned at lower temperatures and produced different flavors that could affect the taste of treated water. Peat, available in boggy areas, provided long-burning fuel but also required specialized knowledge for proper harvesting and preparation. The vessels used for boiling water needed to be heat-resistant and designed to withstand repeated thermal cycling without cracking or developing leaks. Metal pots, when available, were ideal for this purpose, but were expensive and beyond the reach of many medieval households. Clay vessels designed for cooking could serve this purpose, but were more vulnerable to thermal shock and required careful handling to prevent damage.
The size and shape of boiling vessels also affected their efficiency and practicality for water treatment purposes. Medieval people developed various techniques for determining when water had been boiled sufficiently for safety purposes, relying on visual cues like vigorous bubbling and steam production rather than precise temperature measurements. They learned to maintain boiling conditions for appropriate lengths of time to ensure effectiveness while avoiding unnecessary fuel consumption. These techniques were transmitted through practical instruction and community knowledge-sharing systems that helped ensure consistent and effective application. Filtering water through clean cloth or sand was another technique that medieval people used to remove visible impurities and improve water's appearance and taste. While these filtering methods couldn't remove all harmful contaminants, they did help eliminate some sources of illness and made water more acceptable for drinking. Some communities developed elaborate filtering systems using multiple layers of different materials to achieve better results. The materials used for water filtration were selected based on availability and observed effectiveness rather than scientific understanding of filtration principles. Clean linen cloth was commonly used as a first-stage filter to remove large particles and visible debris. Sand, when available, could provide finer filtration that removed smaller particles and helped cloudy water. Some communities experimented with charcoal, crushed shells, or other materials that showed promise for improving water quality through trial and error testing. Multi-stage filtration systems developed by some medieval communities represented sophisticated engineering that combined different materials and techniques to achieve maximum water quality improvement with available resources. These systems might begin with coarse cloth screening to remove large debris, followed by sand filtration for particle removal, and finishing with fine cloth filtering for final clarification. The construction and maintenance of these systems required community cooperation and ongoing investment in materials and labor. The effectiveness of different filtration materials and techniques was evaluated through practical observation rather than scientific testing, leading to gradual improvements in methods as communities learned from experience. Medieval people became skilled at recognizing the signs of effective filtration and adjusting their techniques accordingly. They also learned to maintain their filtration materials properly to ensure continued effectiveness and avoid introducing new sources of contamination. Storage and maintenance of filtration materials required careful attention to prevent them from becoming sources of contamination rather than means of purification.
Cloth filters needed regular washing and drying to prevent the growth of harmful organisms.
Sand filters required periodic cleaning or replacement to maintain their effectiveness.
The containers and equipment used for filtration also needed regular cleaning and maintenance to ensure they didn't compromise water quality.
The addition of wine or vinegar to questionable water was a common practice that reflected both practical and cultural considerations.
Small amounts of alcoholic beverages could indeed help inhibit the growth of some harmful organisms, while also improving the taste of water that might otherwise be unpalatable. This practice was especially common among travelers and soldiers who needed to use water sources of uncertain quality. The types and quantities of wine or vinegar added to water were determined through practical experience and cultural preferences rather than precise scientific formulations.
Weak wine was often preferred because it provided some antimicrobial effects without overwhelming the water's taste or creating intoxication concerns.
Vinegar was sometimes used when wine was not available, though its strong taste made it less popular for regular use. The ratios of these additives to water were typically determined by taste and practical experience rather than standardized measurements. Regional variations in these water treatment practices reflected local availability of materials, cultural preferences, and accumulated experience with different techniques.
Areas with abundant wine production might rely more heavily on wine addition, while regions with limited access to alcoholic beverages might focus more on boiling or filtration techniques.
These regional differences also reflected different disease patterns and water quality challenges that influenced which treatment methods were most necessary and effective. The knowledge and skills required for effective water treatment were transmitted through informal educational systems that combined practical instruction with hands-on experience and community knowledge sharing.
Experienced household managers taught younger family members how to recognize when water treatment was necessary and how to apply different techniques effectively.
This knowledge was also shared among neighbors and community members through social networks that formed around shared water sources and common challenges. Community cooperation in water treatment activities sometimes involved sharing resources, knowledge, and labor to ensure that everyone had access to safe drinking water during emergencies or when individual households lacked the resources needed for effective water treatment.
These cooperative arrangements reflected both practical necessity and cultural values about mutual support and community survival that were essential elements of medieval social organization.
The seasonal timing of different water treatment activities was often coordinated with other household and community activities to maximize efficiency and minimize resource conflicts. Boiling water for safety might be combined with cooking activities to make efficient use of fuel and labor. Filtration system maintenance might be scheduled during periods when water demand was lower, or when other household activities provided opportunities for the careful attention required for these tasks. The integration of water treatment techniques into daily routines required careful planning and time management that balanced safety concerns with practical constraints on time, labor, and resources. Medieval people learned to assess water quality quickly and apply appropriate treatment techniques efficiently, while also managing other essential household responsibilities. These skills were developed through practical experience and represented important components of the knowledge and abilities needed for medieval household management. Religious considerations also influenced medieval water practices in ways that went beyond purely practical concerns. Many communities blessed their wells and water sources through religious ceremonies that were believed to provide spiritual protection against contamination and ensure reliable supplies. These ceremonies often coincided with practical maintenance activities, creating community events that combined spiritual and practical elements. Holy water, used in various Christian religious ceremonies, required special collection and storage procedures that often resulted in higher quality standards than those applied to ordinary household water. The water used for religious purposes was typically collected from the cleanest available sources and stored in specially dedicated containers that were protected from contamination through careful handling and storage practices. Pilgrimages, which were common features of medieval religious life, created special demands for portable water storage and access to clean water sources along travel routes. Pilgrimage routes often developed infrastructure specifically designed to support travelers' water needs, including wells, fountains, and hostels, where pilgrims could replenish their water supplies and rest during long journeys. The economic aspects of medieval water supply created complex systems of cost sharing, labor contribution, and resource allocation that reflected both community cooperation and individual responsibility. Well, construction and maintenance required substantial investments of materials and labor that individual households couldn't typically afford alone, leading to cooperative arrangements where entire communities shared both costs and benefits. These cooperative systems often included detailed agreements about usage rights, maintenance responsibilities, and procedures for resolving disputes about water access or quality. Village councils or other governing bodies typically appointed well keepers and established rules for water use that balanced individual needs with community sustainability concerns. Water carriers emerged as specialized professionals in some medieval communities, offering water delivery services to households that could afford to pay for greater convenience. These water carriers needed to maintain reliable access to clean water sources while also developing efficient transportation methods that allowed them to serve multiple customers profitably. The seasonal nature of medieval water supplies created predictable cycles of abundance and scarcity that influenced everything from agricultural planning to community social patterns. Spring freshets provided opportunities to replenish storage systems and complete major cleaning projects, while summer droughts required careful conservation and sometimes difficult decisions about water allocation priorities. These seasonal cycles also influenced medieval settlement patterns, as communities learned to locate themselves in areas that provided reliable year-round water access, or at least access to multiple sources that could provide backup options during difficult periods. The abandonment of some medieval settlements can often be traced to water supply problems that made continued habitation unsustainable. Water quality assessment in medieval times relied on sensory evaluation techniques that, while lacking scientific precision, often provided useful information about water safety and suitability for different uses. Medieval people learned to evaluate water based on its appearance, smell, taste, and sometimes its effects on other materials or living things. Clear, odorless water from reliable sources was preferred for drinking,
while cloudier or stronger tasting water might be acceptable for washing, cooking, or other household uses where absolute purity was less critical.
Medieval people also learned to recognize seasonal changes in water quality that were normal and predictable versus changes that might indicate contamination or other problems requiring community attention. The temperature of water sources provided another indicator that medieval people used to assess quality and suitability for different purposes. Cold spring water was often preferred for drinking, while warmer water sources might be more suitable for washing or other activities where temperature provided practical advantages.
Margaret's daily routine, like that of millions of other medieval people, was fundamentally shaped by the practical requirements of water collection and management. Her day began and ended with water-related activities, and many of her household tasks required advanced planning to ensure adequate water supplies were available when needed.
Cooking, one of the most water-intensive household activities, required Margaret to plan her water collection around meal preparation schedules while also considering the water needs for cleaning cooking implements and eating utensils.
Medieval cooking methods often required larger quantities of water than modern techniques, both for food preparation itself and for the cleaning activities that followed each meal.
Personal hygiene practices in medieval times were limited by water availability, but they were not entirely absent, as sometimes portrayed in popular representations of the period.
Medieval people did wash themselves regularly, though perhaps not as frequently or as thoroughly as modern people might expect.
These washing activities required heated water, adding fuel costs to the already substantial labor costs of water collection and storage. Laundry represented one of the most water-intensive household activities, requiring large quantities of water for soaking, washing, and rinsing clothes and linens. Medieval people typically concentrated laundry activities into specific days or seasons when adequate water supplies were available and weather conditions supported outdoor drying. Community laundry areas near streams or wells provided opportunities for social interaction, while also allowing people to share both water sources and the physical labor required for cleaning large quantities of textiles. The integration of water collection into daily routines required medieval people to develop sophisticated time management skills that balanced water needs with other essential activities. Water collection trips needed to be coordinated with cooking schedules, work responsibilities, weather conditions, and community social patterns in ways that maximized efficiency while minimizing conflicts with other essential tasks. Children's education about water collection and management began at an early age and included both practical skills and community knowledge about local water sources, seasonal patterns, and quality assessment techniques. This education was essential for community survival and represented a crucial component of the informal educational systems through which medieval communities transmitted essential knowledge across generations. The tools used for water collection were often handmade by community craftspeople using locally available materials and techniques passed down through generations of practical experience. The village cooper, carpenter, and potter all played essential roles in creating and maintaining the equipment that made water collection possible. Their skills representing crucial community resources that everyone depended upon for survival. Maintenance of water collection equipment required regular attention and periodic replacement that represented ongoing costs for medieval households.
Wooden buckets needed rehooping when their iron bands loosened. Ceramic vessels required careful handling to prevent breakage. And ropes needed replacement when they became frayed or weakened by constant use.
The community aspects of water collection created informal but important social institutions that helped maintain community cohesion while also providing mechanisms for coordinating responses to water-related emergencies. When wells became contaminated or streams dried up, it was often through these informal networks that communities organized the collective responses needed to address serious water supply problems. Seasonal celebrations and community events often incorporated water-related activities that combined practical work with social interaction and cultural expression. Well, cleaning activities might become community festivals, while the completion of major water system improvements could provide occasions for celebrations that reinforced community solidarity and shared accomplishment. The knowledge systems that medieval people developed around water collection and management represented sophisticated understandings of local environmental conditions, seasonal patterns, and practical techniques for ensuring reliable water supplies. This knowledge was transmitted through informal educational processes that combined direct instruction with hands-on experience and community participation in water-related activities. Regional variations in climate, geography, and water availability led to the development of different techniques and technologies that reflected local conditions while also demonstrating the adaptability and innovation of medieval communities faced with varying environmental challenges. Mountain communities developed different solutions than river valley settlements, while coastal areas had access to different resources and faced different challenges than inland regions. The legacy of medieval water systems can still be seen in many modern communities, where ancient wells, springs, and water channels continue to provide water or serve as foundations for more modern distribution systems. The organizational principles and cooperative arrangements developed by medieval communities also provided models that influenced the development of later municipal water systems and water management institutions. Margaret's individual story represents millions of similar stories across the medieval world, each adapted to local conditions and community circumstances, but all sharing the fundamental challenge of ensuring reliable access to clean water for survival and basic human dignity. Her daily journey to the village well was both a personal necessity and a participation in community life that connected her to neighbors, ancestors, and future generations, all facing the same essential human need. As the sun began to set over the village, Margaret completed her final water collection trip of the day, her wooden bucket heavy with the clear, cool water that would sustain her family through the night and into the following morning. The path back to her cottage was familiar and comforting, worn smooth by countless feet and representing the accumulated experience of her community's ongoing relationship with the natural world that provided their most essential resource. The medieval approach to water collection and management represented a complex integration of practical skills, community cooperation, and environmental adaptation that sustained millions of people across centuries of changing conditions and challenges. These systems were neither primitive nor inefficient, but rather sophisticated responses to environmental and technological constraints that emphasized sustainability, community resilience, and careful stewardship of essential natural resources.
The daily routines that people like Margaret followed were neither primitive nor inefficient, but rather sophisticated responses to environmental and technological constraints that emphasized sustainability, community resilience, and careful stewardship of essential natural resources. These systems required constant maintenance and community investment, but they provided reliable water supplies that sustained millions of people across centuries of changing environmental and social conditions. The expertise required for successful medieval water management extended far beyond simple water collection to include detailed knowledge of local environmental conditions, seasonal patterns, quality assessment techniques, storage methods, treatment options, and community coordination systems. This expertise was developed through generations of practical experience and transmitted through informal educational systems that combined direct instruction with hands-on participation in water management activities. The depth and sophistication of this knowledge system rivaled that of any other essential survival skill in medieval society. Community leaders and village elders played crucial roles in maintaining and coordinating these water management systems, serving as repositories of essential knowledge while also facilitating the community cooperation and resource sharing that made effective water supply possible. These leadership roles required not only technical knowledge about water sources and management techniques, but also diplomatic skills for resolving conflicts and coordinating community responses to water-related emergencies and long-term challenges. The economic value of reliable water supplies was reflected in property values, settlement decisions, and community development priorities that recognized water access as one of the most important factors determining the viability and prosperity of medieval communities. Villages with reliable, high-quality water sources could support larger populations and more diverse economic activities, while communities with poor water access often struggled with health problems, population limitations, and economic constraints that affected their long-term sustainability. Trade relationships often developed around water-related resources and expertise, with communities that had abundant water supplies or specialized knowledge trading these assets for other essential goods and services. Professional well diggers, water carriers, and specialists in water system construction and maintenance could find employment opportunities across wide geographic areas as communities sought to improve their water supply systems or address water-related problems. The technological innovations that medieval people developed for water collection and management demonstrated remarkable creativity and practical intelligence applied to solving fundamental human problems with limited material resources. These innovations were typically incremental improvements to existing techniques rather than revolutionary breakthroughs, reflecting the practical, experience-based approach to problem-solving that characterized medieval technical development. The windlass systems used at village wells represented sophisticated applications of mechanical advantage principles that allowed human muscle power to lift heavy loads with maximum efficiency and minimum physical strain. The design and construction of these systems required understanding of materials science, mechanical engineering, and human factors that was typically acquired through apprenticeship systems and practical experience rather than formal scientific education. Pulley systems and rope and tackle arrangements used for deep wells demonstrated advanced understanding of mechanical advantage and load distribution that allowed communities to access groundwater sources that would otherwise have been beyond their reach. These systems were often custom designed for specific well depths and local conditions, requiring specialized knowledge and considerable investment in materials and construction labor. Water wheel technology, used primarily for grain milling, but also applicable to water lifting and distribution systems, represented some of the most sophisticated mechanical engineering of the medieval period. These systems required precise understanding of hydraulic principles, gear ratios, and power transmission that was typically concentrated among specialized millwrights and other technical craftspeople who served multiple communities across wide geographic areas. The integration of water wheels with other mechanical systems created opportunities for more complex applications, including water pumping, textile processing, and various manufacturing activities that required reliable power sources. These integrated systems represented significant investments in infrastructure and technical expertise that could provide economic advantages to communities with access to suitable water sources and the resources needed for construction and maintenance. Aqueduct and channeling systems, while less common in Northern Europe than in Mediterranean regions, were used by some medieval communities to transport water across longer distances or difficult terrain. These systems required sophisticated understanding of hydraulic gradients, construction techniques, and maintenance requirements that drew heavily on Roman engineering traditions while also incorporating local innovations and adaptations. The construction of medieval aqueducts and water channels required extensive community cooperation and resource mobilization that often represented the largest public works projects undertaken by medieval communities. These projects required not only significant investments in materials and labor, but also complex negotiations about land use rights, water allocation, and long-term maintenance responsibilities that could affect multiple communities and generations. Bridge and ford construction for water crossing represented another area where medieval communities developed sophisticated engineering solutions that balanced cost, durability, and functionality considerations. These projects were often essential for maintaining access to water sources on both sides of streams and rivers, while also supporting broader transportation and communication networks that connected communities across wider geographic areas. The maintenance and repair of water-related infrastructure required ongoing community investment and specialized knowledge that was often concentrated among particular families or craftspeople who developed expertise in specific types of construction and repair work. These specialists served multiple communities and often traveled seasonally to perform maintenance work during periods when weather conditions and community schedules were most favorable for major projects. Seasonal construction and maintenance cycles for water infrastructure were typically coordinated with agricultural activities and weather patterns to maximize efficiency while minimizing conflicts with other essential community activities. Major construction projects were often undertaken during periods when agricultural labor demands were lower and when weather conditions supported outdoor work, while routine maintenance was scheduled to coincide with natural cycles that made specific types of work more practical or necessary. The financial arrangements for major water infrastructure projects often involved complex cost-sharing agreements between multiple households and sometimes multiple communities that would benefit from the improvements.
These arrangements required sophisticated understanding of project costs, benefit allocation, and long-term maintenance obligations that were typically negotiated through formal community decision-making processes and documented in written agreements when literacy and legal systems supported such documentation.
Community governance systems for water resource management included both formal regulations and informal social arrangements that balanced individual rights with collective needs while also ensuring sustainable use of shared resources. These governance systems often incorporated traditional knowledge and customary practices that had developed over generations of practical experience with local water sources and community cooperation. Dispute resolution mechanisms for water-related conflicts included both formal legal processes and informal mediation systems that reflected the critical importance of maintaining community cooperation around essential resources. These systems needed to balance individual household needs with community sustainability concerns while also maintaining the social cohesion and cooperative relationships that were essential for community survival. The enforcement of water use regulations and community agreements relied primarily on social pressure and community sanctions rather than formal legal penalties, reflecting both the limitations of formal legal systems in rural medieval communities and the effectiveness of social enforcement mechanisms when communities were small and interdependent enough that reputation and social relationships provided powerful incentives for cooperation and compliance. The innovations and adaptations that medieval people developed in response to water supply challenges demonstrated remarkable creativity and practical intelligence applied to solving fundamental human problems with limited technological resources. Their success in maintaining viable communities across varied environments and changing conditions speaks to the effectiveness of their approaches and the value of understanding how human societies can adapt to environmental constraints through cooperative effort and practical innovation. The knowledge systems that medieval communities developed around water collection and management represented accumulated wisdom about local environmental conditions, seasonal patterns, and effective techniques for ensuring reliable water supplies under challenging circumstances. This knowledge was preserved and transmitted through informal educational processes that emphasized practical experience, community participation, and intergenerational knowledge transfer. The social institutions that developed around medieval water systems provided models for community cooperation and resource management that continue to influence modern approaches to water supply and community development. The principles of shared responsibility, collective investment, and community stewardship that characterized medieval water systems remain relevant for contemporary communities facing water supply challenges and environmental constraints. As we reflect on Margaret's story and the broader medieval experience with water collection and management, we can appreciate both the daily challenges that our ancestors faced and the remarkable ingenuity and cooperation they demonstrated in meeting those challenges. Their approaches to water supply represented sophisticated responses to environmental constraints that emphasized sustainability, community resilience, and careful stewardship of essential natural resources. The medieval period's water management systems remind us that human survival and prosperity depend not only on individual effort, but on community cooperation and shared commitment to maintaining the infrastructure and institutions needed to ensure reliable access to essential resources.
The daily water collection routines that shaped medieval life were both individual necessities and community activities that reinforced social bonds while ensuring collective survival.
The transition from medieval to modern water systems involved technological innovations that dramatically reduced the physical labor required for water collection, while also enabling much larger and more concentrated human settlements.
However, the fundamental challenges of ensuring reliable access to clean water remain constant, and the medieval experience provides valuable insights into community-based approaches to resource management that emphasized sustainability and collective responsibility.
The story of how people got water in the Middle Ages is ultimately a story about human adaptation, community cooperation, and the ongoing relationship between human societies and the natural environment that sustains all life. Margaret's daily journey to the village well represents millions of similar journeys across centuries of human experience, each one a testament to the determination and ingenuity that has enabled human communities to survive and thrive under challenging circumstances.
The medieval approach to water supply demonstrates that technological limitations need not prevent the development of effective and sustainable resource management systems when communities are organized around principles of cooperation, shared responsibility, and careful stewardship of essential resources. These principles remain relevant for contemporary communities seeking to develop more sustainable and equitable approaches to water supply and environmental management. The legacy of medieval water systems extends beyond their immediate practical functions to include the social institutions, knowledge systems, and community traditions that developed around the shared challenge of ensuring reliable water supplies. These legacy elements continue to influence modern communities and provide valuable insights into effective approaches to community development and environmental stewardship. As Margaret settled into her cottage for the night, her water collection duties complete until morning, she was connected not only to her immediate community, but to countless generations of ancestors and descendants, all facing the same fundamental challenge of ensuring reliable access to clean water. Her individual efforts contributed to community survival, while also maintaining the cultural traditions and social institutions that would be passed on to future generations facing their own environmental challenges and opportunities. The medieval period's approach to water supply challenges demonstrates that human communities can develop effective and sustainable solutions to environmental constraints through cooperative effort, practical innovation, and careful attention to the relationship between human needs and natural systems. These lessons remain relevant for contemporary communities seeking to address water supply challenges and environmental constraints through community-based approaches that emphasize sustainability, equity, and collective stewardship of essential resources. The daily routines and seasonal patterns that characterized medieval water collection represented sophisticated adaptations to environmental conditions that balanced immediate human needs with long-term sustainability considerations. These adaptations required detailed knowledge of local environmental conditions, seasonal patterns, and effective techniques for water collection and storage that could only be developed through generations of practical experience and community cooperation. The story of medieval water supply is ultimately a story about the resilience and adaptability of human communities faced with environmental challenges and technological constraints. The success of medieval communities in maintaining viable water supply systems across varied environments and changing conditions demonstrates the effectiveness of approaches that emphasize community cooperation, practical innovation, and careful stewardship of essential natural resources. As we conclude this journey through the medieval world of water collection and management, we can appreciate both the daily challenges that shaped the lives of people like Margaret and the remarkable achievements of communities that developed effective solutions to fundamental human needs under challenging circumstances. Their approaches to water supply provide valuable insights into community-based resource management that remain relevant for contemporary communities facing their own water supply challenges and environmental constraints.
The medieval experience reminds us that reliable access to clean water is not merely a technological challenge, but a community challenge that requires cooperative effort, shared responsibility, and careful attention to the relationship between human needs and natural systems.
The daily water collection routines that shaped medieval life were both individual necessities and community activities that reinforced the social bonds and cultural traditions needed to maintain viable communities across generations. Margaret's story represents the daily experience of millions of medieval people who faced the challenge of ensuring reliable water supplies through individual effort and community cooperation. Her success in meeting this challenge, repeated countless times across the medieval world, demonstrates the effectiveness of community-based approaches to resource management that emphasized sustainability, cooperation, and careful stewardship of essential natural resources. The innovations and adaptations that medieval people developed in response to water supply challenges continue to influence modern water management systems and community development approaches. The principles of community cooperation, shared responsibility, and environmental stewardship that characterized medieval water systems remain relevant for contemporary communities seeking to develop more sustainable and equitable approaches to water supply and resource management. As the medieval period gradually gave way to more modern approaches to water supply and community development, the fundamental challenges of ensuring reliable access to clean water remained constant, while the solutions evolved to incorporate new technologies and organizational approaches. However, the community-based principles and cooperative approaches that characterized medieval water systems continued to influence the development of more modern water supply systems and community development practices. The story of how people got water in the Middle Ages provides valuable insights into human adaptation, community resilience, and the ongoing relationship between human societies and the natural environment that sustains all life. These insights remain relevant for contemporary communities facing water supply challenges and seeking to develop more sustainable and equitable approaches to resource management and community development. Margaret's daily routine of water collection represented not only individual survival, but participation in community life that connected her to neighbors, ancestors, and future generations, all sharing the same fundamental human need for reliable access to clean water. Her individual efforts contributed to community survival while also maintaining the cultural traditions and social institutions that would be transmitted to future generations facing their own environmental challenges and opportunities.
The medieval period's approach to water supply demonstrates that human communities can develop effective and sustainable solutions to environmental constraints through practical innovation, community cooperation, and careful attention to the balance between immediate needs and long-term resource conservation.
These medieval systems required constant maintenance and community investment, but they provided reliable water supplies that sustained millions of people across centuries of changing environmental and social conditions. The technological innovations that medieval people developed for water collection and management were often simple in concept, but sophisticated in their adaptation to local conditions and community needs. The village well's windlass system, for example, represented an elegant solution to the challenge of lifting heavy water containers from significant depths using only human muscle power and locally available materials. The design distributed the physical effort required while also providing mechanical advantage that made the task manageable for people of different ages and physical capabilities. Similarly, the development of specialized water containers reflected careful attention to the balance between capacity, durability, weight, and cost considerations that shaped all aspects of medieval technology. The cooper's craft in creating wooden buckets involved not only technical skill in shaping and joining materials, but also understanding of how different woods behaved under various conditions and how metal reinforcements could be integrated to provide maximum durability with minimum material cost. The seasonal rhythms that governed medieval water collection created annual cycles of activity that integrated water management with other essential community functions in ways that maximized efficiency while minimizing conflicts between different demands on community resources and individual time. Spring cleaning activities that prepared water collection equipment for the busy summer season were coordinated with agricultural preparation activities, while autumn water storage projects aligned with food preservation activities that would sustain communities through winter months. These seasonal patterns also created opportunities for community-wide projects that required collective effort and shared investment in infrastructure improvements. Major well excavation projects, the construction of new cisterns, or the development of improved water distribution systems typically occurred during periods when agricultural demands were lower and weather conditions supported outdoor construction activities. The integration of water collection into daily and seasonal routines required medieval people to develop sophisticated planning and coordination skills that balanced multiple competing demands on their time and energy. Women, who performed most household water collection duties, needed to coordinate these activities with food preparation schedules, childcare responsibilities, textile production work, and participation in community activities and religious observances. This coordination challenge was particularly complex during busy agricultural seasons when women's labor was needed for field work, food processing, and other seasonal activities, while water collection needs remained constant or even increased due to higher consumption rates during periods of intensive physical activity. Medieval communities developed various strategies for addressing these competing demands, including cooperative arrangements where households shared water collection duties, and community systems that provided backup support during periods of individual or family crisis. The knowledge systems that supported medieval water management represented accumulated understanding of local environmental conditions that had been developed through generations of practical experience and careful observation. This knowledge included detailed understanding of seasonal water patterns,
quality indicators that could help assess the safety and suitability of different water sources, and practical techniques for improving water quality and storage life under various conditions.
Village elders and community leaders played crucial roles in maintaining and transmitting this essential knowledge, ensuring that information about water sources, seasonal patterns, and effective management techniques was passed on to younger community members who would eventually assume responsibility for maintaining community water supplies. This knowledge transmission process was often informal but highly effective, combining direct instruction with hands-on experience and community participation in water-related activities. The social aspects of medieval water collection extended beyond simple resource sharing to include complex systems of mutual support, information exchange, and community coordination that helped ensure reliable water supplies while also maintaining the social bonds that held medieval communities together. Water collection sites served as informal community centers where people exchanged news, discussed common concerns, and coordinated responses to shared challenges. These social networks were particularly important for vulnerable community members, including widows, elderly people, and families experiencing temporary difficulties that might make normal water collection activities difficult or impossible. Community support systems ensured that these vulnerable members maintained access to essential water supplies while also providing mechanisms for community members to contribute to collective welfare through practical assistance and shared responsibility. The economic dimensions of medieval water supply created complex systems of resource allocation, cost sharing, and community investment that balanced individual needs with collective sustainability concerns. Well, construction and maintenance required substantial investments of materials, labor, and specialized knowledge that individual households typically couldn't provide alone, leading to cooperative arrangements that distributed both costs and benefits across entire communities. These cooperative systems often included detailed agreements about usage rights, maintenance responsibilities, and procedures for resolving disputes about water access or quality issues. Community leaders and governing institutions played important roles in establishing and enforcing these agreements, while also coordinating community responses to water supply emergencies and long-term infrastructure development projects. Water-related trades and specialized occupations emerged in some medieval communities as water supply systems became more complex and sophisticated. Professional well diggers possessed specialized knowledge about locating underground water sources and the technical skills needed for deep excavation projects. Water carriers provided delivery services in larger communities, where distance or physical limitations made individual water collection difficult or impractical. These specialized occupations created economic opportunities while also ensuring that essential water management skills and knowledge were maintained within communities. The training and apprenticeship systems that supported these trades provided mechanisms for transmitting technical knowledge across generations, while also ensuring that communities had access to the specialized skills needed for major water system construction and maintenance projects. The environmental challenges that medieval communities faced in maintaining reliable water supplies included not only seasonal variations in water availability, but also longer-term changes in climate patterns, land use, and water quality that required adaptive responses and sometimes major modifications to established water management systems.
Medieval communities learned to monitor these longer-term changes and develop flexible approaches that could accommodate environmental variations while maintaining essential water supplies. Drought periods that extended beyond normal seasonal patterns required communities to implement emergency conservation measures and sometimes to develop entirely new water sources when established systems proved inadequate. These emergency responses often required rapid community mobilization and the temporary suspension of normal social and economic activities in favor of collective survival efforts. Flooding events posed different challenges by potentially contaminating established water sources, while also creating opportunities to replenish storage systems and complete major cleaning and maintenance projects. Medieval communities developed strategies for managing both the immediate dangers of flooding and the longer-term opportunities that increased water availability might provide for community development projects. The relationship between medieval water systems and broader environmental conditions demonstrated the interconnectedness of human communities with natural systems in ways that required careful attention to environmental stewardship and sustainable resource use practices. Medieval people understood through practical experience that their water supplies depended on maintaining healthy watersheds, protecting springs and streams from contamination, and managing land use practices in ways that supported reliable water availability. These environmental considerations influenced settlement patterns, agricultural practices, and community development decisions in ways that balanced immediate human needs with longer-term environmental sustainability concerns. Communities that failed to maintain this balance often faced water supply crises that could threaten their continued viability and force difficult decisions about relocation or major changes to established ways of life. The cultural and religious dimensions of medieval water management added additional layers of meaning and motivation to practical water collection and conservation activities. Many communities blessed their wells and water sources through religious ceremonies that combined spiritual significance with practical maintenance activities, creating community events that reinforced both religious devotion and collective commitment to essential infrastructure. Holy water, required for various Christian religious ceremonies, needed to meet higher quality standards than ordinary household water, leading to the development of specialized collection and storage procedures that often resulted in improved techniques that could be applied to other water management activities. Pilgrimage routes and religious institutions often developed sophisticated water supply systems that served as models for secular communities while also demonstrating the practical benefits of cooperative investment in water infrastructure. The legacy of medieval water management systems extends far beyond their immediate practical functions to include the organizational principles, technical innovations, and community traditions that continue to influence modern approaches to water supply and resource management. Many contemporary water management challenges require the same kind of community cooperation, practical innovation, and careful environmental stewardship that characterized successful medieval water systems. Modern municipal water systems, while technologically more sophisticated than their medieval predecessors, often embody the same basic principles of community investment, shared responsibility, and collective stewardship that made medieval water systems effective and sustainable. The organizational structures and cooperative arrangements that medieval communities developed for managing shared water resources provided models that continue to influence contemporary approaches to public utility management and community resource development. The technical innovations that medieval people developed for water collection, storage, and distribution demonstrated remarkable creativity and practical intelligence applied to solving fundamental human problems with limited technological resources. Many of these innovations, while simple in concept, incorporated sophisticated understanding of material science, hydraulic principles, and human factors engineering that remained relevant for centuries after their initial development. The maintenance and repair techniques that medieval communities developed for their water systems demonstrated the importance of ongoing stewardship and community investment in essential infrastructure. These maintenance systems required specialized knowledge, regular community labor contributions, and careful planning to ensure that essential systems remained functional across changing environmental conditions and varying community circumstances. The seasonal rhythms and daily routines that characterized medieval water collection created patterns of community life that integrated essential survival activities with social interaction, cultural expression, and community governance in ways that reinforced both practical effectiveness and social cohesion. These integrated approaches to community life provided models for sustainable community development that balanced individual needs with collective welfare. Margaret's individual experience of daily water collection was simultaneously a personal survival activity and a participation in community life that connected her to neighbors, ancestors, and future generations, all sharing the same fundamental challenge of ensuring reliable access to clean water. Her daily routines were shaped by practical necessities, but also by community traditions and social expectations that made water collection a shared cultural experience rather than simply an individual burden. The physical demands of medieval water collection required people to maintain strength, endurance, and practical skills that were essential for community survival, but also contributed to personal health and fitness in ways that integrated essential work with physical conditioning. The daily walking, lifting, and carrying activities associated with water collection provided regular exercise that supported overall health while also accomplishing essential household tasks. The seasonal variations in water collection activities created annual cycles of more and less demanding work that corresponded to other seasonal patterns in medieval life, including agricultural cycles, food preparation activities, and community social patterns. These integrated seasonal rhythms helped distribute physical demands across the year, while also coordinating water management activities with other essential community functions. The community knowledge systems that supported medieval water management included not only technical information about water sources and collection techniques, but also social knowledge about cooperation, resource sharing, and conflict resolution that was essential for maintaining community water systems across generations of changing circumstances and varying individual capabilities. The informal educational systems through which this knowledge was transmitted combined practical instruction with community participation in ways that ensured knowledge continuity while also adapting traditional practices to changing conditions and new challenges. Children learned water management skills through gradual participation in family and community activities that provided hands-on experience while also transmitting cultural values and community traditions. The economic aspects of medieval water supply created market relationships and trade opportunities that extended beyond local communities to include regional networks of specialized craftspeople, material suppliers, and technical experts who provided the resources and knowledge needed for major water system construction and maintenance projects. These economic relationships demonstrated the interconnectedness of medieval communities and the importance of regional cooperation and trade networks for supporting local resource management systems. The materials needed for water system construction often came from distant sources, while the specialized knowledge required for major projects was typically acquired through regional networks of craftspeople and technical experts. The environmental impacts of medieval water use were generally sustainable because of the relatively small scale of individual communities and the water management techniques that emphasized conservation and careful stewardship rather than maximum exploitation of available resources. However, medieval people did face environmental challenges when population growth or changing land use patterns exceeded the capacity of established water systems. These environmental challenges required adaptive responses that demonstrated the flexibility and innovation of medieval communities, while also highlighting the importance of maintaining balance between human needs and environmental capacity. Communities that successfully adapted to environmental challenges typically did so through cooperative effort and shared commitment to sustainable resource management practices. The technological limitations that constrained medieval water systems also encouraged the development of community-based approaches that emphasized cooperation, resource sharing, and collective investment in essential infrastructure. These community-based approaches often proved more resilient and sustainable than more centralized systems because they distributed both costs and responsibilities across entire communities while also ensuring that essential knowledge and skills were widely available. The transition from medieval to modern water systems involved technological innovations that dramatically reduced the physical labor required for water collection, while also enabling much larger and more concentrated human settlements. However, this transition also involved changes in community organization and social relationships that sometimes reduced the cooperative traditions and shared responsibility systems that had made medieval water systems both effective and sustainable. Contemporary water management challenges, including issues related to water scarcity, quality control, and sustainable resource use, often require the same kind of community cooperation, practical innovation, and environmental stewardship that characterized successful medieval water systems. The medieval experience provides valuable insights into community-based approaches to resource management that remain relevant for addressing contemporary water supply challenges. The story of medieval water supply ultimately demonstrates the remarkable capacity of human communities to develop effective solutions to fundamental challenges through cooperative effort, practical innovation, and careful attention to the relationship between human needs and environmental constraints. These lessons remain relevant for contemporary communities seeking to develop more sustainable and equitable approaches to water supply and resource management. As night settled over Margaret's village and the familiar sounds of evening activities replaced the busy noise of daytime work,
the community's relationship with its water sources entered a period of temporary rest that would resume with the dawn and another day of essential water collection activities.
The village well stood silent in the darkness, its stone walls holding the promise of another day's supply of clean water that would sustain the community through whatever challenges the following day might bring.
The medieval approach to water supply challenges demonstrates that human survival and prosperity depend not only on technological capabilities, but on community cooperation, shared responsibility, and careful stewardship of essential natural resources.
Margaret's daily water collection routine represented both individual necessity and community participation in systems that sustained entire communities across generations of changing conditions and challenges. The knowledge, skills, and community traditions that supported medieval water systems were developed through centuries of practical experience and cooperative effort that balanced individual needs with collective welfare, while also maintaining sustainable relationships with the natural environment that provided life's most essential resource. These achievements deserve recognition, not only for their immediate practical effectiveness, but also for their demonstration of human capacity for cooperative problem solving and sustainable resource management.
The legacy of medieval water systems continues to influence contemporary communities and provides valuable insights into approaches to resource management that emphasize community cooperation, practical innovation, and environmental stewardship.
As we face contemporary water supply challenges and environmental constraints, the medieval experience reminds us that effective solutions require not only technological capabilities, but also community commitment to shared responsibility and sustainable resource use practices.
Margaret's story, repeated millions of times across the medieval world in countless variations adapted to local conditions and community circumstances, represents the daily experience of human communities learning to thrive within environmental constraints through cooperative effort and practical innovation. Her individual success in meeting the challenge of reliable water collection contributed to community survival, while also maintaining cultural traditions and social institutions that would be transmitted to future generations. The medieval period's water management systems remind us that human communities can develop effective and sustainable solutions to fundamental challenges when they are organized around principles of cooperation, shared responsibility, and careful stewardship of essential resources. These principles remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago, and the medieval experience provides valuable guidance for communities seeking to address contemporary resource management challenges through community-based approaches that emphasize sustainability and collective welfare. As Margaret's story comes to a close, with another successful day of water collection completed and her family's needs met through her individual effort and community cooperation, we are reminded that the most fundamental human needs are met not through individual effort alone, but through participation in community systems that balance personal responsibility with collective support and shared stewardship of the resources that sustain all life. The medieval experience of water collection and management represents a remarkable achievement in human adaptation and community cooperation that sustained millions of people across centuries of changing conditions while maintaining sustainable relationships with the natural environment. This achievement demonstrates the capacity of human communities to develop effective solutions to fundamental challenges through practical innovation, cooperative effort, and careful attention to the balance between immediate needs and long-term sustainability.
Margaret's final trip to the well on this particular day in 1347 was both an ending and a beginning, the completion of another day's essential work and preparation for tomorrow's continuation of the eternal human challenge of ensuring reliable access to clean water.
As she secured her cottage for the night and prepared for rest, she could take satisfaction in knowing that her efforts had contributed to her family's survival and well-being, while also participating in community traditions that connected her to past and future generations, sharing the same fundamental human needs and challenges.
The story of how people got water in the Middle Ages is ultimately a story of human resilience, community cooperation, and the ongoing relationship between human societies and the natural world that continues to sustain all life.
As we conclude this journey through Margaret's medieval world, we can appreciate both the daily challenges our ancestors faced and the remarkable achievements of communities that developed effective solutions to fundamental human needs through cooperative effort and practical innovation.
Their legacy continues to influence contemporary approaches to resource management and community development, reminding us that sustainable solutions to essential human needs require both technological capability and community commitment to shared responsibility and environmental stewardship. And so, as Margaret settled into her cottage with clean water secured for her family's needs, we bid farewell to her world while carrying forward the lessons of community cooperation and sustainable resource management that made her daily survival possible. Good night.